That's great. And actually, that is a terrific segue into me introducing you and
Okay.
really starting our program. So it's 7:04. We might as well release the hounds. So most of you know Bruce. If you don't, I'll tell you a little bit about him. Architectural historian, arts historian with an emphasis on the 1920s, 30s in Sacramento, but certainly not bounded by that. A graduate of Occidental College in Los Angeles, and also a graduate degree from the Arts Center College of Design, very prestigious art school. So Bruce is a massive presence in the Sacramento area. He's been a longtime great friend of the Sacramento Room. And by the way, I want to provide a big old shout out to the Sacramento Art Deco Society and for all the great things they do. Of course, Bruce has a connection to that organization. So big ups to the Art Deco Society. So thanks for being here. Bruce is also very well known for his walking tours throughout various spots in the Sacramento area. A few places come to mind: Grant Union High School, impacted by the WPA, also Sacramento Junior College / City College. He's also done several fantastic presentations on architecture and arts in the Sacramento area. In fact, we can kind of consider this part of a series of basically January presentations that that Bruce gives for the Sacramento Public Library. So we're just so tickled to have him here. I think I've absolutely covered everything. The one thing I would say in addition to that is please withhold questions until the very end. We'll have a Q&A. Also, do your darndest to keep your mute on, because we want to make sure that there's no distortion, no cross sound or anything like that, so Bruce can land the plane most successfully. So with that said, I'm done talking. I want to pass things on to the great Bruce Marwick. Thanks, Bruce.
Okay,
Great.
now it's starting. Made it by seconds.
I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And I'm ready to go. How do I look?
Looks great, Bruce.
Okay. Wonderful. Well, this show, first, welcome. Thank you for attending tonight, and very excited about this particular presentation because interestingly enough, even though Stackpole was a San Francisco artist, he actually did 4 important public art pieces here in Sacramento. 3 still survive to this day. And some of them actually been in the news, and I will address that towards the end of the presentation. But because I wanted to bring attention to these public art pieces, I decided to jump in. I actually intended to do another artist, a gentleman by the name of O.C. Malmquist, also of San Francisco, but in November decided to switch gears, and I put this together in about 10 weeks. But it's been extremely enjoyable because I've known the name Ralph Stackpole for years, and it's always a delight to delve in to an artist. So I always begin my presentations acknowledging those institutions that have really helped out. And many times there are ones I'm familiar with, sometimes they're new, but I'm just going to go through the list quickly because you're going to see a lot of wonderful documents and photos from each of these institutions, and they include the California State Archives, the Center for the Sacramento History, Sacramento City College Special Collections. One that is rarely heard about but has been in the news recently is the Condos Gallery Collection at Sacramento City College, the History Center at San Francisco Public Library, and then another terrific institution that I've gotten to know some of the board members, and they are a terrific reference. If you're interested in the WPA at all, please investigate the website of the Living New Deal. It is sponsored by the Department of Geography at UC Berkeley, and it is a terrific site. Of course, I want to thank the Sacramento Room. And as I mentioned, I had a wonderful in-person presentation just last Saturday there at the Sacramento Room. And then finally, one of the reasons this presentation came together quickly was there was one person, I only got to meet him sadly once, is a City College professor by the name of Bill Mahan. And he was terrific in helping to preserve Ralph Stackpole's legacy. And as we go through the presentation, I'll be able to highlight the wonderful things he did to preserve Ralph Stackpole art. I'd also like to just quickly look at a brief overview of Stackpole's early life. He was born in Williams, Oregon in 1885, and he was born very humbly. This was a lumber town, very much a hardworking, unskilled labor town. His father did work in the mills, and that was his upbringing. But his mother was very passionate about, early on, Ralph Stackpole's abilities as an artist. Unfortunately, Stackpole's father died tragically in 1895 when he was only 10 years old, when his father fell into a lumber saw. And as the eventuality of that tragedy was that he was forced to work as an unskilled laborer to help support himself and his mother. At 16, while working in a San Francisco dance hall, he enrolled in classes at the Mark Hopkins Institute of Fine Art. I'm not totally clear on how he got down to San Francisco, but he was obviously a man of many talents and many skills, as will also be borne out in this presentation. And it's very commendable that within short order of him arriving in San Francisco, he had actually caught the eye of some professionals who actually facilitated he getting into the Institute. Then he was actually chosen and was able to move to France after the 1906 San Francisco earthquake and fire, through, once again, the support of two art mentors, the sculptor Arthur Putman and the painter Gottardo Piazzoni. And, you know, once again, he always operated at a very high skill level. And then his career really began when he returned to San Francisco in 1908 after attending the Ecole de Beaux-Arts in Paris. And he also took quarters with Piazzoni and other artists. So he had a really rich experience for 2 years in Paris. And when he came back, he was only 22 years old. On the left is it's actually a photograph of him roughly about the time when he was either prior or just coming back from Europe. And in the background is a wonderful late 19th century illustration of the Ecole de Beaux-Arts. And then Stackpole continually challenged himself artistically, and I'll give you some examples. Even though he'd only been back in San Francisco for a few years, he became very much absorbed and interested in the Ashcan artist movement in New York City. And he wanted to study under Robert Henry, so he basically traveled to New York and studied and learned for a full year, coming back a year later to actually get married. 3 years later, he was featured in the Panama Pacific International Exposition in San Francisco, winning several awards with multiple sculptural pieces. I'll be sharing some of those. He again was always enticed to kind of broaden himself. So he returned to Europe in the early 20s, and he lived there 2 to 3 years and had must have had some wonderful patrons because he was able to spend significant amount of time in Florence, Venice, Paris, and Switzerland. When he returned in 1923, he began teaching at the San Francisco Art Institute in the 1920s. And then once again, his interest in art and artists, he traveled to Mexico in the winter of 1926 to see the murals of Diego Rivera that Rivera was doing at the Ministry of Education in Mexico City. And it is believed that Stackpole and Rivera first met in Paris. Now, one of the interesting things of this research project is I've never been able to really nail down specifically when Rivera and he met. There's lots of conjecture. Some historians actually put it in the first period in between 1906 and 1908. I do not think it was that early, but that is one piece of information I would love to nail down. And it's quite amazing to go out online and see all the different opinions on that particular subject. This is a wonderful portrait of Stackpole at his height. He's age 47. And this is about the time when he was most notable for many of his important commissions. And as I go through your history, I'll also highlight some of the most important people he associated with and engaged with artistically was at that period. And then this is my all-time favorite picture of Ralph Stackpole, and because it shows the physicality of the man. It shows that he really did have a physicality when he came to doing his sculpture. His style of sculpture was called direct method, meaning historically accomplished master sculptors would do clay modeling, and then they would generally have a group of apprentice professionals that would come in, possibly get the material like a stone or marble down to a close enough cut that then the master would come back and do the finish work. Stackpole did not do that. He came in and physically worked and worked and worked the stone again. And this particular is a wonderful, not only showing his physicality, but it's a photograph by his son, Peter Stackpole, approximately 1942-43. And the sculpture in particular has a really, really terrific story as well. The making of a classicist. In the background or in the vignette, you actually see the mansion, the Mark Hopkins mansion on Nob Hill. This was the Hopkins home. Of course, Mark Hopkins was part of the Big Four and railroad. At a certain point, it became the Mark Hopkins Fine Art Institute. And this is where Stackpole started training at age 16. And what I'm going to do is, what's kind of interesting is that Stackpole, like many artists, his style evolved. And I'm going to show you, elements of what made him a classicist, both as a sculptor and as a painter and as a line drawer and a human study artist, because he started his life really as a classical artist. And he matured through middle of his career and became a social realist artist. And then towards the end of his career, he actually did become more of a modernist and abstract artist. But it'll be interesting to look at these pieces and then what he was doing mid-career. This is a bas-relief that actually was auctioned off in the last half dozen years. This is a drawing that I found at the Sacramento Room. As you go through, you'll note that many of the art objects I'm using come from a variety of resources that I introduced. This is a sculpture I was not familiar with that I discovered at the Sacramento City College Special Collections. And one of the terrific stories I kind of teased out of this that I did not realize that of all things, the City College, and this was really due to this gentleman, Bill Mahan, that I mentioned, actually mounted in 1984 a Ralph Stackpole exhibit in the Condos Gallery at City College. And I'll be talking later about that. Here's another wonderful chalk drawing. Also found this through one of the auction houses, Clar's, which is also in Oakland. Wonderful drawing of a woman, hooded woman. And as you look at these, when Stackpole gets into his social realist period, you'll be seeing that actually this ability to do classical drawing really served him well as he did murals and other types of art. One of the other mysteries that I found challenging was with this particular project was I found many photos and pictures in magazines and brochures of Stackpole work. But what I didn't have were dates. Sometimes I didn't have description of materials. And also I have no idea where they are, if they still exist. There's a side story that many of the objects that Stackpole had created ended up in the home of Peter Stackpole, his son. And sadly, that home burned in 1993 in the Berkeley Hills fire. And this is a wonderful classical bronze bust of the Judge James M. Sewell. This is actually at San Francisco City Hall. This was done, I do know the date, 1919. And it's actually the bust that Bill Mahan was standing next to when I first began this program. And it kind of shows the power of his classical portraiture and sculptures. So the other thing I really investigated was the community of artists that Stackpole matured in, as well as supported, and then in many ways became the dean of. When he returned to San Francisco in 1908 from Paris, he immediately took up quarters on Montgomery Street near the Montgomery block. And the Montgomery block, which is pictured here, was built in 1853. It was the largest building in San Francisco at the time of its creation. And it had many notable first businesses. And then, of course, as the building matured and had less prestigious tenants, 20, 30, 40 years after its original creation, artists found it very attractive. It had wonderful classic art studios, high ceilings, and it became a mecca where artists could both congregate and then cross-pollinate ideas. To give you an idea of the kind of personalities that ended up in this building, and it would include Maynard Dixon, Dorothea Lange, the poet George Sterling, many notables either had residence or took up shop in the Montgomery building. Later on, it took on the nickname of the Monkey Block. And I think part of it is there's a story behind where the name originally came from, but it kind of stuck because of the characters and the creative energy coming out of the building. So what I also like to talk about are some of the establishments in the neighborhood that made the Montgomery, and the closest cross street is Washington. This was historically the Barbary Coast. This was, dare I say, in the early years of the 49ers was the red light district, and it was also a cosmopolitan area. Pictured here, excuse me, is upper left is a wonderful illustration by one of the deans of the art community at the turn of this century was Javier Martinez, a very talented painter. And in the upper left is a painting of the Bohemian restaurant that existed for 3 years prior to the earthquake and fire in the Montgomery building. And that was Copa's. And it was a great congregating spot. And the photo below actually shows Javier Martinez on the far right side. One of the wonderful little discoveries that I made, and I'm still trying to figure out where this photo originates from, although I saw several times it was placed online without credit, sadly. On the far left of all things, I'm absolutely sure that that is Ralph Stackpole. So he's already integrated into the community prior to the great earthquake. And it's wonderful to see him because in that picture, he's no more than 20 or 21. So now I'm going to show you the close proximity. The building I just showed you, the Montgomery block or the Monkey building, basically is where the Transamerica building is today. And right up the street, these 5, 6, 7 buildings that date back to the inception of San Francisco in the 1850s. These buildings are here because at one point, just behind them or just to the east of them was the bay. The San Francisco Bay came up this far, and Montgomery Street was, one of the first streets closest to the docks. So the building that ultimately Stackpole actually had several residences on Montgomery Street through the years because he would come and go. I think this building, in which I'm going to point out, 716 Montgomery Street, is where he's most associated with from the mid-20s up through the mid-40s. But prior to that, I've heard the address 728 associated with him in 1908 is that, he was very beholden and loved this street as many of the artists did. In addition, the building just 2 doors to the right with the round windows is a beautiful building called the Canessa building. And its name Canessa actually comes from the name of the ship that was partly used for the building. And supposedly the building was built on top of the Canessa. I don't know if that is fully true, but most of these buildings all have a rich history. If we turn around and look the other direction, so you now see the Canessa right in the middle, the actual 716 Montgomery is just down the street here. And this picture is from 1933 or thereafter. Another important establishment of the 30s in the neighborhood was the Black Cat Cafe. And this was also one of the Bohemian restaurants of great interest. And you can see proximity to both Montgomery building and to Stackpole's studio. That this was a watering hole. It was an attraction spot. And I also love the Art Deco sign. I will also mention that, and I went by it too quickly, the concept of the black cat, actually, I don't know if you remember, I was talking about the Javier Martinez illustration or painting, is that Javier Martinez actually painted black cats in copas originally. And that part of picking up, there were actually several black cat restaurants through the years that became sites associated with the continuation of the Bohemian community. Now, this particular Black Cat Cafe existed all the way from 33 to 1963. And it is also a notable restaurant in that in the 50s and 60s became a very important congregating spot for the LGBTQ community, both for entertainment and activism. So this particular location has just a wonderful and rich history to the neighborhood. So that comes up to the next really big event for Ralph Stackpole and for San Francisco was the Pan Pacific Exposition or International Exposition that basically was where the Marina District in San Francisco is today. And I call it a sculptural Shangri-La because it gave all of the wonderful classical artists in California, in San Francisco, an opportunity to show their skill base and create this, lavish, spectacular city or Shangri-La by the Bay. Now, here is one of the sculptures that Stackpole got a lot of attention for. It went out in the syndicated press. And, I always like to rely on press of the time. And I thought this was interesting that it came up in, of all places, and I actually found this particular story in quite a few newspapers across the West. This came up in the Riverside Daily Press, and it was highlighting this carved stone entrance piece. And I'm probably going to not pronounce this, but it's called a toponum, and it was all, once again, carved directly from stone. This was not cast. This was not terracotta. This is the actual building. It was called the Palace of Varied Industry. You can get a kind of an idea looking at the header piece created by Stackpole, just how large this building. Also, if you look at the doors down below, the doors are probably entrance 8 feet. And I'm also going to point out a couple of the side statuary where the square is. Those are life-size workers. And what's fun about it is that I can now share with you a full-size rendition of one of those workers created by Stackpole. Now, what's interesting to me is that while Stackpole did do a lot of direct carving, it appears to me that this looks like a clay model, which makes sense because in the previous, there are multiple renditions of this exact same figure. So, thinking of along the lines of a Gladden McBean, they were probably cast in architectural terracotta would be my guess. Now we're going to come a couple years later, and one of the things I love about doing these research projects is finding interesting ephemera that come from different resources but apply to the same event, the same architect, or the same artist. In this particular case, I admired the poster on the right for years. I actually saw it in person. Gary Kurtz had shared it with me. You may know that name. He was a longtime special collections librarian, now retired at the State Library of California. It dates from 1919, and one of the things I like to say about this poster is that it kind of clearly shows that Art Deco got started much earlier than the mid-20s and is just a wonderful use of both graphic design and color. This poster actually, of all things, promotes a ball where Ralph Stackpole was the shared sponsor. And on the left is a ad, or rather a magazine, not a magazine, but a newspaper article that is talking about the same artist ball. And it has an interesting subject matter because it's talking about at the ball, there will be models painted bronze like statues. And here's a quote from Ralph Stackpole. Miss Rosenquist is a model justly famous for her figure. No one but a Puritan could object to seeing her under a coat of bronze as planned. Well, of course, there was pushback. And I think Ralph Stackpole, either because of his interesting experiences in Europe or New York City or the Bohemian of the Barbary Coast, I think there are certain San Franciscans that would probably have pushed back against this concept. But as I understand it, went forward, and I believe Miss Rosenquist was a model from the San Francisco Art Institute. Which leads me to another little discovery. Here's a photograph of Stackpole and his first wife, Adele. It's at the San Francisco Public Library. It's attributed to 1934. And I kept looking at it and thinking, well, I had showed you an earlier portrait of Stackpole when he was 47 years old in roughly 1933. I think this is much earlier. And then it struck me, I think that this is not from the 34 art ball, which is shown in this newspaper ad, but is actually from 1919. It just makes total sense. So I can only, this is only conjecture, but I think this is a pretty good thought. And then in the background, I have no idea why this photo is trimmed out the way it is, except it probably came from a newspaper article where they ran the copy around. But I thought it was very interesting that the layout artist chose to keep the two women in the background, which after the bronze women of the event probably makes sense why they're giving a steely eye. So as I mentioned, I'm going to slip past Stackpole's wonderful experience, a couple of years in Europe. He was called back from Europe by Sacramentans because of two commissions that he was being offered for public art pieces in Sacramento, and they were both fountains. So in 1923, he returns from Europe, arriving roughly July, August, and immediately makes his way to Sacramento and starts to engage with the committees. And there are two different committees for these two fountains. And I'm going to speak about each one separately. The first one I'm going to talk about is the Swanson statue or the Swanson Memorial in William Land Park. And many of you may know that it has sadly been in the news here recently because it was right after the Christmas or Christmas weekend. It was beheaded. And I will speak about this at the end of the presentation, but it is just timely that I'm doing this presentation now. The article, sadly, as will happen in news articles, got Ralph Stackpole's last name wrong. There are two O's when there should only be one, but it gives the broad outlines of the fountain as it will exist when it's completed. One of the another connections I made was discovering this drawing in the Condos Gallery collection at City College. And I believe it's in the collection because of that 1984 exhibit that was mounted by Bill Mahan, the City College professor, and others. Unfortunately, I took this photo a couple of years ago. It is in a frame under glass, so it's not as sharp as I would like to be, but it was wonderful to discover. I love my own personal background as a graphic designer. I love seeing original working drawings for a completed project. So that drawing is from the mid-20s. Now we're actually looking at the completed Swanson from its backside, actually looking north towards downtown. When this was first completed in 1926, where the trees are in the distance, you could actually see the skyline of downtown Sacramento. including the Pacific Western Insurance Company and the Capitol. And of course, Land Park and its trees are maturing, but this is a wonderful photograph, probably the late 40s or mid 50s. In front is where there are ball diamonds now. Originally, they actually called it the parade ground. Here's seeing it from the front. And while we're somewhat familiar with some of the damage and or vandalism more recently to the Swanson, what is notable here is that this photo that dates from 1984 actually already we can see that the nose of the Swanson has already been damaged at some time between the 50s when it was still in place and 30 years hence when it was photographed again around 1984. And then another part of the story is, this is a photo I actually took on December 13th, 2022. My daughter Isabel and I actually occasionally will walk right by the statue, right in front of it on some of the old WPA created pathways that course around the knoll there. And I looked up and I said to Isabel, I said, there's something wrong here. There's something not right about the hat. And I looked, and then I noticed a shard, and then I noticed a second shard, and I realized, oh my gosh, somebody's taken a hammer to the hat. This is December 13th, and it was late in the evening. I actually came back the next morning to kind of investigate. I decided, I actually noticed people walking on some of the shards. I said, I'm going to gather them and get them over to Parks as soon as I can. And that's exactly what I did. So here are the shards I found, and I thought, because I was sending the information over to City Parks, that I should at least, give some scaling, and I sent them off, and then at a certain point, I actually had an opportunity to turn them over. I will be talking later about what's going on with those shards, but I want to continue with the story of the actually initial creation of these two Stackpole fountains. The second is the Coleman Fountain in Cesar Chavez Park, across from City Hall. This was also a commission that was awarded to Stackpole, and he worked on them almost in unison between late 1923 and their installations in 26 and 1927. Now, the Coleman was very much different. It had a much different purpose. In both cases, both of the fountains were privately funded. In the case of Swanson, the Swanson family. In the case of Coleman, it was the widow of William Coleman that funded this particular fountain. And as the story goes, Coleman was very fond of animals. So he wanted, and he of course had been very successful as a developer in the 1880s and 90s in Sacramento. He wanted to have a fountain that was accessible to animals. And of course, by the time the fountain got built, there were very few animals on the streets of Sacramento. But be that as it may, the original fountain concept, and this is a concept model, I do not know how large it is, but it was obviously detailed enough to be photographed and put in the Sacramento Bee, is you can see in the base above the basin, it was supposed to have classic spout heads of animals. And that was ultimately removed from the final design, as well as the Cupid at the top was also removed, but the basic form and shape of the fountain remained the same, except for one other primary detail. If you look at what I call the maidens, there are three female figures in a triangular pattern around the base. They look to be of more of a classical, similar to some of the art I was showing you earlier. And this dates from 1924, the model. we are moving forward to the actual completed fountain and the vertical pylon. What is noticeable initially is the figures had changed. They had become a new style, a new form. And this grows out of an influence that I believe Stackpole had and was influenced by in 1926. And I will get that into that in a few slides. But I want you to take a particular note of the style of one of the maidens, one of the three sides. And I also want you to take note of how lovely it is to see water emitting from the fountain, because unfortunately right now, water is not running. The fountain's water is turned off. And then this is a picture of the fountain from an angle I particularly like, which is showing the Plaza Tower in the background, which is a Art Deco style skyscraper, really. It's 26 stories, but it was not built in this Art Deco period. It was built in the early 90s to basically reflect the style, the step backs of a classic Art Deco skyscraper. And once again, you can see that the base has evolved. There is no animal heads emitting water, but the fountain has a wonderful feel with it operating like a fountain. Can anyone guess, just to themselves, who the special guests might be arriving from Mexico City to visit Ralph Stackpole? You might have them in mind, but when I show you the next slide, I'm sure you will know exactly who these guests were. And I have a feeling I have shown the graphic of the classic bullet or streamliner from LA, the Southern Pacific Daylight, which is probably how these two individuals arrived in San Francisco. And they would be none other than Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera. So one of the wonderful things I love about the story of Ralph Stackpole is he had while he started as a classical artist, as I mentioned, he was very open to other styles and other mediums. And he was also open to this person he apparently had met in Europe, possibly in Paris. And he was so enamored, particularly when he went back to Mexico in 1926, wintertime, that he went with actually several San Franciscans, and he came back with the intention of somehow helping Rivera get commissions along with his cohorts in San Francisco. And he thought it would just be absolutely a wonderful asset for San Francisco and the community to have some public art pieces by Rivera. At the time that he was in Mexico City, I don't know if Rivera and Kahlo were even dating at the time, but in the interim, they did get married. And in this picture, she's in her early 20s. Diego Rivera at this point is a very successful and notable, almost international star in his 40s. This next photograph actually shows another really important relationship that in many ways facilitated and helped the impetus of getting Rivera to San Francisco. And that would be the person to the right of Kahlo and to the left of Ralph Stackpole. And that would be the architect Timothy Pfluger. Pfluger was at this point the most noted architect, had done many Art Deco buildings, Art Deco theaters. He was at this point, or in the late 20s, working on a new Pacific Stock Exchange building. He had hired Ralph Stackpole to do multiple statuary and bas reliefs for the building. And I believe it was Stackpole who was very encouraging to Pfluger that, you really need to consider Rivera to do a mural or maybe multiple murals in the stock exchange and get him a commission. Let's get him to San Francisco. So part of the stock exchange is a tower, and I'll be showing you a picture of that. But there is at the one of the top floors of the tower, the City Club. And this is a multi-story mural adjacent to a stairway that Stackpole, with his encouragement and Pfluger's through his commission, Diego Rivera did this really terrific mural. And it shows, different aspects of California commerce. There was also a ceiling. So that you would spy this on the ceiling as you went up the stairs. And just a terrific piece. At the same time, there was two additional important mural commissions, one most notably at the San Francisco Art Institute, that actually features Diego Rivera in it. And as is the tradition, as seen in many of Rivera's, he did other notable personalities, including Timothy Pfluger is in that mural at the Art Institute. And if you never have had a chance, unfortunately, the Art Institute has just been sold. So, I'm very much hoping that mural will stay available to be seen. But it's another one of San Francisco's treasures and was done in San Francisco during this period of late 1930 and early 1931 by Diego Rivera. I would be remiss not to mention as well, this was the period when Rivera and Frida Kahlo lived with Ralph Stackpole on Montgomery Street, 716. I love this photo. I think this is from that visit in 1931 of Rivera and Stackpole, and it obviously shows they were comfortable with each other. They could ham it up for the photographers. And then this is just a lovely portrait done by Rivera of Stackpole. Now, there's a little bit of mystery here in that in 1931, this is obviously not a portrait of that moment. So it's believed that it was done by Rivera from a photograph, but it might make sense given that Rivera may have actually and probably did meet Stackpole, when he was in his 30s rather than in his 40s. Right after the time period when Stackpole did his important sculptures at the stock exchange, there was also, in just a brief time, a frenzy and interest in doing mural art. Rivera and Frida Kahlo have gone back, or actually they've gone all over America at this point, doing more important commissions along the lines of in Detroit and New York City. But in San Francisco, through the WPA, or rather, I should say the New Deal, and through some of the programs already being initiated by the FDR administration, there's this concept of doing murals inside of Coit Tower. And so that is exactly what happens. And there's an initiative, and 26 different artists are commissioned to do social realist murals in the tower. And if you never had a chance to visit, I highly recommend, because it's spectacular. Another making one of these fun connections was finding, unfortunately, these are not original sketches, but sketches of preparatory drawings for one of the murals that Stackpole did at the Coit Tower. These date from 1933. And then this is one of the large murals, and it was basically showing California industry, canning in particular. I love the kind of the machine age activity going on in the background and all the activity. If you look at the faces, you can easily see the sketches, how they kind of applied to the character of individuals he was putting on, the workers on the line, literally. And then there's this blow up section from the mural. And because of my Art Deco interest, this is very much what is sometimes called not even Art Deco, but machine age art. Art that honors the machine of the early 20s and 1930s, but also the machines put in stark contrast the labor of the workers. And once again, we see, you know, this contrast between this huge machinery and these workers who are working day in, day out to keep the machinery going. As a contrast to that, it made me think of some of Stackpole's son's photography, Peter. Peter, at this point, this photo is from roughly 1934, or excuse me, probably 1936 actually. But at this point, Peter Stackpole is only 23 years of age, and he's already had the opportunity to be exposed to a lot of great photographers, including Edward Weston and Ansel Adams, through his connections through his dad. He's already become a very significant photographer in his own right. And very interestingly enough, he takes on the task of documenting two of the great civic projects and transportation projects of the 1930s, the Bay Bridge and the Golden Gate Bridge. And with his youth, he wasn't intimidated to go up on these guide wires with the workers and get these spectacular views. Now, I just like showing this particular photo because like his dad's mural in Coit Tower, it shows that contrast between, you know, these epic structures that are going up, yet, you know, men and women laborers with great courage are making it all happen. So you might ask, where did Stackpole create all of these sculptures? Well, one of the interesting things about 716 Montgomery Street, that on that row of buildings, there was only, you know, in subsequent years, the bay had filled in, and most of the city blocks around this particular block were filled in with buildings right to the alleyways. 716 had the unusual physical plan that in that entire block, it's the only building that only went halfway to the alley. The rest of the lot was open to the alley, and what became in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, Ralph Stackpole's stone yard. It's where he did all his stone carving, and that initial photo I showed you with he and Frida Kahlo and Ralph Stackpole, that was the three of them photographed in the stone yard. And as we go through here, I'll show you other, it'd be obvious that it's the same location. So this is the Pacific Stock Exchange, as I mentioned, by the architect, Timothy Pfluger. And so you can see where the pieces that Stackpole created were. He created these two 20-foot tall pylons in front of the, you know, classic Greek building colonnade. He did the medallions. There were 4 medallions along the upper frieze of the front building. And then to the left, on the far left side, you can see the Samson entrance where he did a wonderful Art Deco bas relief. This is one of the pylons. It's sometimes called the Mother Earth. Its full title was Women's Fruitfulness of Mother Earth. It was on the, if you're standing towards a building, it was on the left. On the right was Man and His Inventions. And these are period photos. I love it that you can see part of the colonnade in the background. This is more of a contemporary shot. I think this shot is very instructive because you can actually see the assembly lines. This is such a large structure that it is obvious that Stackpole did it in sections, almost like a classic, Greek Parthenon, and then drop them upon each other. Another thing to keep in mind is I will be talking about Stackpole's heroic Pacifica from Treasure Island. And I take a little bit of Remember the Faces. We'll be seeing that face again on Treasure Island, at least a familial face. And then another little discovery I made. This is out of a brochure at City College for the 1984 exhibit that I mentioned at the Condos Gallery. And while the photograph isn't that best because it's a second or third generation on a brochure, Peter Stackpole signed it, and it's in the collection. I thought that was very nice because Peter Stackpole was very instrumental because he provided many of the pieces that were shown at the show. I'll also mention that Stackpole passed away in 1973. He had actually moved the last 20 years of his life in France, and Peter went and brought all of that back to California. I believe many of those pieces were in that Condos Gallery exhibit. And this is probably the most Art Deco of anything that Stackpole did. This is the Samson entrance to the Pacific Stock Exchange. You might recognize it. It's also the background image I used for the flyer and the invitations for this presentation. Another discovery I made a couple of years ago, and I was kind of flabbergasted, is I always thought there was only in mind 3 Stackpole public art pieces in Sacramento. This was actually a 4th. In 1936, Stackpole was commissioned to do a bas relief for a new streamlined modern building for the McClatchy newspaper chain, the Sacramento Bee chain. And it was to be on their new radio station, KFBK, at the corner of K and I streets. And this article, even though it's a little hard to see what's going on, I can tell from the details that Stackpole is actually on location, that maybe the finishing touches of the bas relief were done on the building, or maybe he just came and it was installed and this was for a photo op. This is another little mystery, but the article also talks about, sculptor claims he inaugurated a new art school. What he's really talking about is this style of where he's doing all his own carving. He's not using apprentices, and he has this direct cutting style, which is, of course, mentioned in the subtitle of this newspaper article. Here's is a wonderful, I think, taken from the top of the Sacramento County Courthouse in 1936 of the new KFBK building. On the right is the 1902 original Sacramento Bee building. And then the Bee, basically to the left of the KFBK is the main studio. And then to the left of it was one of the production. So they had a almost 2/3 of this city block just at the time devoted to the Sacramento Bee. But what I want to do is I'm going to use another colored square to help you see where inside that square is the bas relief. So the bas relief was good size. It was like 3 feet by 15 feet, but it was dwarfed by the size of the building. For many years, I'd never seen a good picture of this bas relief. It basically, I had heard it showed different vignettes of activities and storytelling at KFBK radio station, whether it be sports or theater, also agricultural news. So there are these multiple vignettes in the bas relief. This is a wonderful period photo from the 40s, because as the local radio station, KFBK was also instrumental in supporting the war effort. And these are KFBK players or studio players going out to the local military bases, which Sacramento and Northern California had many, to basically cheer up the troops. So I've mentioned Bill Mahan multiple times. Bill Mahan's personal files are actually in the Sacramento room, who's sponsoring this lecture. I was thrilled going through the files, and it was not until this most recent research that I found this negative. It's not a negative of the whole bas relief. It's about, I'd say 70%, but I finally got to see in detail what he had created, and it's quite wonderful. And as I mentioned, you can see the activities of in-studio concerts, doing live coverage of ball or sporting events, the agricultural reports, all included in this bas relief. And then here's a blow up. And I did this blow up because I'm going to share another piece here shortly, a few years later, by a related artist. And I think there may be some cross-pollination of ideas. This is just a thought, but I wanted to share this with you because it's also just as an art piece quite wonderful, and also shows the influence of social realism. This was not a WPA or a FAP, Federal Arts Project, PWA, Treasury, but there was cross-pollination across even to the private sector when it came to social realism as an art style. So I mentioned Stackpole's important relationship with Diego Rivera, and I just think it's really admirable. I mean, Rivera was a controversial figure. He was a communist. There was a lot of not San Franciscans who weren't so sure about bringing Rivera even to San Francisco to do murals, and Stackpole would have none of it. He was totally supportive. He was totally behind him, 100%. There's another artist of some renown, and is becoming even more renowned, whose pieces are in the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, who are in national collections all over the country, a name that some of you will know and some of you will not, but hopefully you'll have an opportunity to look at more of his art. And that would be the most notable Black artist of the 1930s, Sergeant Johnson. And what you see on shown here is the San Francisco Art Association Bulletin for October 1934. And the sculpture is by Sergeant Johnson, a wonderful piece of a Black woman. Around her torso are two young children. Stackpole kind of knew that every artist in the Bay Area during the Great Depression needed support. And even though Sergeant Johnson had gotten some national attention. He entered art and won many prizes in New York City in the Harlem Renaissance. He still encouraged others to partake and buy art pieces by Sergeant Johnson. So the other thing about this bulletin on the left, I don't know, some of you may have already read, at the column on the left of the art by Sergeant Johnson is the Montgomery Street Gossip column by Ralph Stackpole. So wow, when I saw that, I said, not only did he support artists, you know, he would actually put it in print and encourage collectors, dealers. So this is just a quote from the gossip column, and it's one of the highlights. He says, Sergeant Johnson has just finished a fine carving of a woman and 2 children, and the Leon Levies have purchased it for their collection. The Art Association, of course, that'd be the San Francisco Art Association, heartily congratulates Sergeant Johnson. I just thought that was terrific and speaks well of Ralph Stackpole. So Stackpole also was influenced by Rivera and did do murals. And one of the murals he did was at George Washington High School in San Francisco. And you may have heard of George Washington High School, as it has also been in the news, not so much for Stackpole's murals, but by another very renowned artist of the New Deal era, another friend of Ralph Stackpole, Victor Arnautoff, who also worked closely with Rivera, who took his own trips to Mexico City to actually study under Rivera. So George Washington High School had multiple important pieces of art by Sergeant Johnson, by Victor Arnautoff, and by Ralph Stackpole. And I'm going to get caught up here just a second. So in the 30s, before I get into the mural, I'm going to finish my thoughts on Sergeant Johnson. Sergeant Johnson had the opportunity, after another artist was brought in and the committees had decided either he was too controversial or his imagery was too socialist, had turned it over to Sergeant Johnson. Now, Victor Arnautoff had done his murals at George Washington in the mid-30s. This particular piece, which is a retaining wall at the south end of the football field at George Washington High School, was a mammoth piece. It's like 180 feet long, and it basically shows all aspects of sports. And this piece was completed in 1942. Sergeant Johnson is the artist, and unlike Stackpole, who was only working in stone, this was in cast concrete. But you can see, and I'm going to zoom in, it's a beautiful, beautiful piece. This is actually my photo. I've been over to visit it. This is just one portion of it, and it's really a spectacular piece, beautifully done, and it goes through all aspects of sports, from tennis to fencing to, well, I don't know about fencing, but I was going to say rowing, to boxing, to baseball, to football, and it's just very heroic. I'm sure the Olympic rings are there, of course, symbolic of California having the Olympics in the 30s. I show this for 2 reasons. I don't know if, I think in general, social realism influenced Sergeant Johnson's work here, but I think in many ways he was watching everyone's work. There was just this wonderful as I've mentioned, cross-pollination between artists. I will also mention another thing that's not well known is that Sergeant Johnson also had the opportunity, as I understand, to be the supervising artist on all the art that was created at George Washington High School. So I've shown you the work that Stackpole done in stone. Now I'm going to show his frescoes. This is in a wonderful period black and white of the library mural that Stackpole did at George Washington High. And in this case, he's showing activities once again in the high school. On the left would be home economics. On the right would be, radio technology. And it's clear that this is an early photo because there's not even any, this is recently documentation photography. Books are not even on the shelves. Another wonderful discovery I made, I always wondered, did any of the local architects have any contact? Was there any inclination to put murals by Stackpole in something in Sacramento? And I just happened to be at the State Archives one day and I put in Stackpole's name and only one thing came up, but it was a wonderful little treasure. What it was an original cover letter handwritten by Stackpole to two gentlemen, Mr. Pogue and Mr. Eichler. And Mr. Eichler, some of you will know that name, is Alfred Eichler, the designer of the Tower Bridge, who worked for 30 years in the California State Architect's Office. And basically the letter is a solicitation saying, I would be very interested in doing a mural for, at the time would have been the California State building a New Deal building of public works. And he included samples, and the samples of all things were from two pictures of Coit Tower Stackpole murals and 3 pictures of Victor Arnautoff murals from George Washington High. And then this is the building. Some of you will know it. It's still there on N Street. And then this is the quote. So here they are, 2 of Victor Arnautoff in the George Washington High School and 3 of my Coit Tower frescoes. You can keep them for your files. Now I'm going to move on to Stackpole's most important mural, and that was done at our own Sacramento City College. At the time, it would have been Sacramento Junior College. This is the new auditorium built in 1936 under the PWA, Public Works Administration. And Stackpole had an opportunity to do the mural in the auditorium foyer. And then this is it. And I'm going to mention it that this is a more recent photo of a fully restored mural. Once again, the name of Bill Mahan comes up because he was once again instrumental in both 1984 and then again a touch-up in 1993 to basically get it to pristine condition. On top of that, he helped get this interpretive panel in the front of the mural be created that was finally installed and rededicated in 1993. And I wanted to mention that because of the next slide is going to cover the interpretive panel. Another terrific discovery of a piece of art, probably once again from the '84 Condos Gallery exhibit, an original sketch about 18 inches wide of this 30-foot mural in the collection, in the condos. And unfortunately, I don't think anyone had seen it for decades until the archivist helped me to dig it out. James, I don't know if you can just check in. I do not have a clock running. If you could just give me a clock count.
Yeah, so we're running at around 8:20.
Okay.
And loving all of it.
Okay, so I'm I'm on good schedule, but I have a tendency to get it absorbed, but I will continue. So I'm just going to highlight some of the features. This showed some of the wonderful industries that Stackpole saw students from City College eventually doing: lumber, engineering, mining, and agriculture. Stackpole, the summer he painted the mural, was actually the professor who's in front was actually a professor on campus he grabbed, as well as students. And then this is a major shout out. This was another discovery that helped me get focused in on this condos exhibit. Clearly it states it's a basically a public information document. Exhibit May 7th, June 1st, 1984, William E. Mahan, Bill Mahan. And then another person I want to give a shout out, Colette Tanaka. I've had a conversation with Colette, and she helped steer me in certain directions on my research, and just wonderful that they both took this passion, documented it, because here 40 years later, if they hadn't laid the trail, I couldn't have found it. I would also be remiss to not identify two additional important Sacramento artists who were also involved in the 1980s with the restoration. The first would be Daryl Forney, who was a teacher at City College, a well-known fine artist. He actually helped get administration on board to embrace the mural. And then the other artist would be Fred Dalkey, a very notable artist, sometimes considered in the same breath as Greg Condos and Wayne Thiebaud. He actually did major parts of the restoration himself in 1984 and 1993. Now, as an Art Deco person, this is my favorite piece because of his history and his Timothy Pfluger was one of the master architects of the Golden Gate International Exhibition on Treasure Island. And Stackpole was awarded the 80-foot tall Central Court Pacifica statue. This is just a wonderful image. I've not identified, I believe, because he's holding the instrument, he's working on it. This is Ralph Stackpole, late 30s, talking to another Sacramento artist, also notable New Deal artist, Otis Ofield. I wanted to show you, if you aren't familiar, just how epic Treasure Island was. You know, sadly, in more recent decades, only 3 buildings currently exist from the original. But I want to show you where Pacifica, or the Pacifica Court, was. It was at the west end. The 3 remaining buildings are the original administration building, which was going to be a PAA terminal. One of the hangars devoted to aviation science. And then the art building, where Diego Rivera, for a second time, came to the Bay Area to paint his heroic Unity mural that's, I think, still on display at SF MoMA and is open to the public. There's an outside door access, and it's, if you've never seen it, I highly recommend it. It's spectacular. Here's a very large model showing the Pacifica Court and the statue, just showing that this was just one heroic portion of Treasure Island. I found this recently at the San Francisco History Center. I'm glad to see they've actually, I don't know if I was an impetus, they have actually digitally scanned it. It's now up online to be seen. It's my jokingly, Ralph Stackpole doing his Indiana Jones. And then this is the full shot. He's working with a model of Pacifica. I do not know if Peter Stackpole took this photo, but it has a Hollywood theater character to it. And Peter Stackpole, in addition to doing wonderful New Deal, had a very successful career photographing in Hollywood. So he would know about dramatic lighting as well. This gives you the epic scale of Pacifica. Behind it was this wonderful corrugated metal that was a chime. You can see the photographer in the lower left center. Here's a color shot. And the head, and I asked you to think about the head when you were thinking of the Mother Earth, in particular statues at the Pacific Stock Exchange. You can see the sharp nose, the forehead of the style. Now, artists took great liberty in promotions because it was just, it was cast concrete, although there was lighting at night, but it became the figurehead of the entire exhibition. And then this is just a fun little thing. I love discoveries. This is a promo photo from early 1960s. I believe that is the model we saw on the previous Stackpole of the dramatic lighting photo. What this is a promo photo of the city of Pacifica receiving the model in the early 60s. And the photographer, I don't know if they were joking around, probably grabbed one of the women from the office and said, do this pose and maybe we'll put you in the newspaper. Well, that's exactly what happened. And her name is Mickey Franks, 15 years of age, February 28th, 1960. Now, the last art piece I'm going to talk about has also a very interesting and compelling story, given Ralph Stackpole's investment in and support of New Deal artists. In 1938, FDR had remembered a piece of art that was shown at the PPI, Panama Pacific Exposition. It was of a female. It's sometimes called worship. It's also called reverence. And he reached out to Stackpole and said, would you consider making either something like it or a rendition of it for the grounds at Hyde Park, the family FDR home in the Hudson River Valley. And in 38, how do you turn down FDR during the Great Depression? And he said yes, but he ruminated it on for years because his style had moved on, his political leanings had moved on. And I'm going to show you what the original statue looked like. In the background, you can actually see an edge of the Palace of Fine Arts. This female figure actually was on location in front of the Palace of Fine Arts until the late 50s, until it was finally taken, not by a historical party. But I have another wonderful shot of what it looked like in profile. So this is what, and it's somewhat of a life-size figure. This is what FDR was hoping to get. Stackpole, as I mentioned, thought about it. 39 went by, 40, 1941. And somebody probably finally said, Ralph, you need to work on this. This is important. You don't turn down FDR. And he did diligently work on it, but he decided, well, my style has moved on. My social consciousness, my relationship to socialism has changed. I honor the worker and I'm conscientious about the worker. So this is not a drawing for it, but it also shows he's always been interested in kind of these things of reverence and worship. This is what he came up with. This is a photograph of the actual, and it's not even called reverence. It's the title I've seen is Kneeling Woman. And this is what he delivered. And FDR, I don't know if you remember when I first showed his picture in the background, you know, FDR talked a good game, but he really, what he loved was naval art, ships and ship captains. And this was not the, dare I say, nymph he was expecting. And so he told, go hide it on the property. And because I don't want it in eyesight. And there it remained for many years. And this is a more recent photo, 2007, I understand. Now, I was at Hyde Park. I do not remember seeing it. I understand here in more recent years, it's been brought inside under roof. But, you know, it does have a wonderful feel. It's just not what FDR had expected. So Stackpole's legacy in Sacramento. So I use this photo again because you can see he's actually chiseling away at the kneeling woman in that particular photo. I use his legacy because there are two pieces of these public art that are in jeopardy. One is the Coleman, which I like to call the Three Maidens, that the water has been turned off and there are now temporarily, because of concern about sanitation, the city has put in 6 concrete square planters that they serve some purpose. I don't think it's an elegant solution, but it is, you know, our hope, the Sacramento Art Deco Society hope that the city will keep the water flowing to the Coleman. But that is to be determined. Another one is, you probably all been wondering when I might get to this, and that is, here I was finding shards getting chipped off on December 13th, and then I was coming home from San Jose and learned that the Swanson had been decapitated. And, you know, it is my hope that there is hopefully a plan to restore it, but I'm also respectful that my hope is that this statue can be used in a teaching form, that we can use it as a discussion, you know, to talk about America's past and California's past and the usage of land and, you know, Native Americans who came before. It would be sad to my heart if it was not restored. I do think that the word on the base had the pioneers may have had something to do with it, but that's conjecture. But I just wanted to bring that to everyone's attention because there's a lot of compelling thought needs to be put forward towards this statue. I will also mention the Center for Sacramento History, which in the past I've been on its board. Currently, they have the remnants of the statue. This is the head, and these are shards that were gathered by the police department on December 27th, 2022. These pieces are now with the Center for Sacramento History. It hasn't been fully determined who's going to do the restoration process, but there is currently going on an effort to gather photos. And so if by chance any of you have earlier photos, particularly if there are photos that predate the 1980s with the nose in place, I know I have sent photos. I know other contributors have sent photos. The Center for Sacramento History has photos. So if you have anything, we would love to see them make their way to the Center for Sacramento History. You can look them up. The city historian is Marcia Iman. So with that, this is another favorite I have. Also wonderful tribute by the son, Peter Stackpole, while he was a Life magazine photographer of his dad in his studio. The date is believed to be 1940. So with that, I apologize if I ran long, but I'll give it back to James and we can field any questions.
Okay, everybody. So pardon for the dog barking in the background there. Bruce, outstanding. What a great overview. An artist whose impacts are worldwide, but felt very much in California and of course in Sacramento. So I want to direct everyone over to some of the comments over in the chat. One question I'm going to ask on Joanne's behalf relates to the KFBK frieze still being there on the building. Is it still there?
No, unfortunately, the KFBK building came down with the West End urban renewal around 1960.
Okay.
And one of the mysteries is I believe in my own research of Eleanor McClatchy, she wouldn't have allowed, or she would have made an attempt to save it. So, but I could find no documentation. There were elements, architectural terracotta that came out off of the 1902 building that were saved. So that's kind of a mystery.
Okay. Okay. So that's gone, redevelopment being the instigator. And then if y'all have a chance to look in the chat area, Anne's got some really great comments about the Treasure Island Museum and, you know, efforts to sort of extend the life of the Pan American exposition. So yeah, just take a look at some of the comments over there. Roberta mentions Peter Stackpole's obvious, you know, career with Life magazine, as we see with the photo there of Ralph Stackpole. So let me go ahead and do this, everybody. I'd like to take a couple of questions. Where, you know, it's getting kind of late, but it would be really nice to maybe get a question or two. And if you have a question, go ahead and put it in the chat. And yes, thank you, Anne. I misspoke. The Golden Gate International Exposition. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. So no questions. A lot of stuff going into the meeting chat. So oh, here's a question from
how did they not get into the war drafted?
Okay, so here's a question about let's see, from Roberta for you. How did Ralph not get drafted in 1918?
Yeah, he would have been in his early 30s. And I think a lot of artists just didn't go.
Yeah, in 1918, he would have been 32, 33.
But everybody got a draft card up to age 40.
Actually, it was age 31. So
oh, was it? Oh, okay.
Yeah, between 21 and 31.
Okay, that's how I missed it then.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Roberta. Okay. Any other questions? Just like I said, go ahead and put it in the chat if you got one. I think it's quite possible that Bruce covered everything. So as they say, no need for questions, right? Okay.
Okay. Can I just ask it instead of typing it in?
Sure, go ahead.
They did save all the murals at George Washington High School. That was a huge. I mean, I'm a San Franciscan, so I follow this, and my friends all went there, and the school board finally said, "Yeah, leave them up," because it was nasty. It was a nasty.
Yeah, and I will. Is that Anne? Are you speaking or?
No, that's not. No, I'm not Ann. No, the speaker isn't Ann.
Okay.
Roberta.
Okay. Well, thank you, Roberta. And the reason I wanted to reflect on that is that there's also a terrific documentary that I've seen here recently, just in the last 6 months, called Town Destroyer. that goes into great detail, showing both sides of the conversation
Right.
on this exact subject of the Victor Arnautoff, George Washington High murals.
Right.
So I just, it's a very robust story.
I'll have to watch it.
Okay. Thank you, Roberta. And then Anne has a question. Was Ralph involved in plans to save or recast Pacifica after the fair?
So there were expectations and thoughts. I know Ralph I've seen some comments that he had hoped that it would be recast and possibly placed on, Alcatraz wasn't available at the time, but, an island in the bay, possibly Angel Island. And just, I love that thought. I mean, it's just kind of a wonderful, because one of the other tragic sights, and I saw multiple photos and I couldn't bring myself, was the military apparently didn't pull it down until 1942. And it sadly just reminded me of other heroic statues, some for good cause. If it's a dictator, you want to pull down their statues. But watching this 80-foot piece just come down, it was quite something to see it in photographic form. And I also think there may have been a lost opportunity, and this also happened sadly with Diego Rivera's GGIE Golden Gate mural, 80 feet by 22-foot high mural, that Timothy Pfluger had planned to help fund and get a large appropriate either auditorium, and the mural eventually did go into a smaller auditorium foyer at San Francisco City College, but it was always too small and always too cramped. And the reason that happened was that Pfluger, if my memory serves me correctly, passed away in 1948 before they could really mount the effort to create the building necessary to handle Rivera's terrific piece. And I'm sure, losing Pfluger also did not give Stackpole the opportunity to pursue that if that was a goal. And I also mentioned, the world changed dramatically in the Bay Area, professionally, artistically, after World War II, abstract expressionism, modernism was all the height. There was conflicting feelings on the part of artists that had supported social realism. I've certainly seen that also with, artists, because I spent many years in Southern California. The Cold War was in full force. The McClatchy era, or there's a Freudian slip, the McCarthy era was in full force. And some of you will remember that I did a lecture on a teacher I had in Southern California who graduated in the 30s from Sacramento Junior College. Her name is Bernice Plifka, and she was very successful graphic designer. She also painted backgrounds for Disney and Hanna-Barbera movies. She worked in New York City. She worked in New York, in Paris, but she got caught up and was called before the House Un-American Committee. And basically she was a Hollywood person that could not get hired. And this is somebody that, I actually had some, I was in my 20s and I had contact with her in her 70s. So, it was a complicated time in the 40s and 50s. For social realism in the Bay Area.
Okay, everybody. Well, I think with that, I'm going to go ahead and tie things up here. I want to thank everyone for their comments and their questions. And of course, we want to thank Bruce for all this really hard work, the super research. He's always bringing something new to the body of knowledge that we enjoy as Sacramentans and Californians. So with that said, thank you so much. I also want to remind everyone before I let you go, again, come see me on Saturday at 1 o'clock. Professor Terry Castaneda will be presenting on Marie Mason Potts, Mountain Maidu woman activist and publicist. So 1 o'clock Central Library on Saturday. Bruce, I guess we have to wait. I guess we got to wait.
Thank you, James, and thank you for this double duty, both an in-person and a Zoom. That was kind of wonderful. And I also want to just thank all the individuals who've come tonight. I really enjoy sharing and appreciate your attendance. So thank you.
All right. Always classy. Thank you so much, everybody. And we will see you soon. Thank you for attending the Sacramento Public Library Sacramento Art Deco Society program. All
Thank
right.
you.
Right.
Thank you.